Happy
Okay, we on?
420. Yeah, we're on.
Oh my God. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Good evening. Good morning.
This
Welcome
is
to the show. It is an unusual conjunction right now. We are
Huh?
at the we are at the beginning of Easter, at the
What?
end of Passover, and we're at 420. Now, what
Huh?
that means is when they say he has risen, I guess either we go with the Easter version or we go with the Passover version, where it means he's finally gotten off the toilet because matzah can kill you. Or it means he's finally gotten off the couch because he's been doing indica all morning. We'll find out this and many other things on today's 420 version of The Rotation.
Oh.
Well, I tell you, every year we try to figure out what we can do for 420. But it's funny because most people don't even know what the
Yeah, he's out.
Yeah.
Gary, it's not working.
It's all good.
Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to take him out of here. You're gonna have to take over there, Kano.
No, it's all good.
Well,
Technical issues being what they are, I'm sure we'll sort it out. But yeah, I mean, happy 420.
I'm the only Jew in my neighborhood. I have a feeling they're cutting me off.
No, you've been on the whole time. Nobody has understood anything you've said, though.
Gary, it's not
really?
anti-Semitism to have a slow computer. It is okay.
Oh, the computer is fine. It's the internet connection out here. They want to build roads and not internet connections because nobody wants to hear anything. That's
Okay,
it.
say it, but it's like really good right now. But say it as fast as you can.
Okay. Today is a fantastic conjunction between the beginning of Easter, the end of Passover, and 420. And what it means is when they say he has arisen, that means either the Easter version, what that is all about, the Jewish version, which means he's finally gotten off the toilet because matzah can do that to you, or he's been doing indica all day, he's finally gotten off the couch. We'll find out what that means and what the heck 420 is all about today.
Awesome. Well, Gary, we got a very special guest to kick us off with the history of 420, who is no stranger to this show. But for folks who are tuning in for the first time, just want to do a round of introductions. My name is Christopher Kano. I am the executive director of Suncoast NORML, and I'm actually broadcasting live from the Washington, D.C. area, as you can see from the background. And then, of course, Gary, who is our political director and director of public policy, everything political to do with Suncoast NORML, is, of course, broadcaster from parts unknown where they have poor internet service. But that's okay. That's just the state of Florida for you. And then in the studio, holding everything down, our amateur engineer and our professional deputy director is Carlos Hermida.
Thank you.
But our special guest, who for folks who have been in the cannabis activism space, needs no introduction. But for those who may not know, for the millennials and Zoomers out there, is Steve Bloom, who is a well-known journalist, publisher of celebstoner.com, and has been in the cannabis journalism space for a very, very long time, and the celebrity journalism space for a very, very long time. And Steve, welcome back to the rotation. Thank you for joining us on 420.
Hey, Chris, Carlos, and Gary, great to be back.
Yeah,
and happy Pesach 420 for my Jewish friends.
Indeed. This is the interesting thing, how everything kind of coincides. Just every few I guess what takes I don't know, 7 to 10 years for 420 to fall on a Sunday, but also ironically, like you said, to be at the end of Passover, beginning of the Easter celebrations for two major religions. And it's kind of cool just to have a Sunday where everybody's celebrating for once. It's a lot going on in the world that folks are kind of down and bummed out about. And so we're going to do our best to bring an upbeat show today and cheer folks up. We'll worry about the news at the end of the show. And that way you could get your lighters up so you don't have to be depressed when we read the news. But, Steve, a lot of people hear 420. They identify that number with cannabis culture. And maybe a lot of folks who have just not been around don't understand the history of it. Like, why do we call it 420? Why do we spark up at 4:20? Why do we have a holiday on April 20th? Why is this prevalent numerology just so sacred to the cannabis users? I mean, help us a little bit with the history of 420.
Well, 420 is kind of full of myth. It's there's mysteries to it. The history of it all, is a little unclear and to some extent, but primarily it came out of Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area, the Grateful Dead kind of hub scene, going back to the 70s, where the Dead had a house in San Francisco, and then they had a place up in San Rafael, in Marin County, and Deadheads would kind of hang around the house there, and the 420 vibe kind of spread there, and it's credit to some high school students who went to San Rafael High School. They call themselves loosely the Waldos, and they've kind of basically gotten credit for coming up with the term. There's some debate over that, and my role at 420 kind of steps in 1990. So if the Waldos and others came up with the idea in, say, 1970, 71, 72, around those years, it took 20 years for 420 to sort of go nationwide. And it just happened by sort of luck that I was walking through the Grateful Dead parking lot at Oakland Coliseum on December 28th, 1990, when I was handed a flyer that told the story of 420. This is really kind of my claim to fame. Now, I'm not the only person who picked up this flyer, but I was the only person who worked at High Times who picked up the flyer. And 420 was news to me. The flyer is kind of funny in a lot of ways. It's clever. It's definitely written by activists. It's typewritten and it's handwritten. It has statements, as you can see on the screen: 420, wake and bake, legalize it. Smoke pot at 420, support NORML. So obviously, heart in the right place. And then goes on to explain what, according to the authors of this flyer, that 420 was a police code for a marijuana arrest in progress. And so the idea was to smoke in 420 as sort of a protest to the arrests happening on using a 420 code. That's sort of my guess where they came up with that. But even the idea of 420, whoever created 420, whether it was the people who wrote the flyer, whether it was the Waldos, where did they come up with the idea of 420? Why 420? Why not 415? Why not 425? I mean, they loosely say, they looked at a clock at one time and saw 420 and kind of alarms went off in their mind, but it's still kind of vague. Why I mean, it certainly has a great ring to it now that we say it over and over again, just 425, that's a little too long, it's like, it's a 420. It's just, has like a ring and a rhyme to it. So it caught on, the idea of that 420, which I still can't guarantee I exactly know why that time was chosen by whomever created 420, whether it's the Waldos or the mysterious people behind the flyer or some other people who claim credit, to 420. So it's kind of a little bit, like a telephone story where it kind of went from person to person until, it kind of picked up some steam, as opposed to one individual creating it. And I kind of like that. It's more folkloric and it doesn't really give individual credit to anybody because it was kind of thing that was done by a community as opposed to one individual or one group. So for me, when the flyer, was placed in my hand, read it, what I really got out of the flyer, besides the idea that there was a code, which was debunked by the Waldos several years later, that code didn't exist, and therefore justifying their claims, was what the flyer said towards the bottom of the flyer, which was that the big idea is to get together for 420, on 420, at 420,
Nice.
on that day, everybody around the world, doing this. So what does it say there? It says, the real time to get stoned, the grand master of all holidays, 420 on 420. This is when you can't quite read the whole thing, but we're going to meet at 420 on 420 for 420 at in Marin County, Dublinis Ridge, Sunspot, and Mount Tamalpais. Well, what a great place. So that's where the original 420 events took place, on the mountain ridge at Mount Tamalpais, which I've been to. It's a beautiful spot north of San Francisco. And so that's where people first started to meet up to have 420 events. And who were those people? We're still not sure, but that's the claim. And that seems to have been verified also by the Waldos. So, so that was happening. And so the hub of where it all happened was Northern California. And having received that flyer, I brought it back with me to the High Times office after I came back from that, week of shows, or that, the Dead would do about 4 shows at the end of the year at Oakland Coliseum, culminating in a New Year's show. So I was there for that and covering for High Times. And I was kind of new at High Times also. I started High Times in 88, 89, and I nobody at High Times was really into the Dead like I was. So I decided to cover the Dead, and Dead were in the news because Deadheads were being harassed at shows, and there were a couple of arrests, a lot of arrests and things like that. So I was kind of working the outside kind of scene, not so much the inside. The music was cool, but I was kind of curious what was going on outside in the lot. And that's when I got that flyer. And I don't know if that flyer was given out any other day. I don't know how many were handed out, hundreds. I know Debbie Goldsberry, a friend of mine who was with Cannabis Action Network, living out there, picked up a flyer. I lost my flyer. I had it up at High Times, and it sort of disappeared from my folder, or whomever, the art director never gave it back to me, or whatever it was. So Debbie actually had it several years ago, and it says green flyer. It was, that kind of really established it, because darn, I lost the flyer. I can't really prove it, but Debbie had it. So obviously I was not the only person to receive that flyer, but I take a little claim to fame because having worked at High Times, I brought it back to the office and we published it verbatim, in an article in the May 91 issue. So, I was there, I don't know, it would take several months later after the magazine, after, news would break for things to be in the magazine. So it actually didn't get into an issue till the May issue. I was actually there, at the end of December, but for whatever reason. And I was a news editor at that time. And so it was up to me to do whatever I wanted in the news section. I just decided to, to just transcribe the flyer and put it verbatim in the magazine and let it go from there and see what people think. And 420 just started from that point, because we started to see references. We had a section in the back of the magazine called the Hemp 100, and it was kind of a cartoon section of the reader's favorite things. And all of a sudden 420 kept popping up in that section, 420 this, 420 that. And then companies started to use the name 420. It was 420 Tours, 420 Records. And so upon, the 4 or 5 years of 420 kind of getting, picking up a little steam, that's when the Waldos contacted High Times and said, "Hey, wait a second, we're the guys," because they saw the coverage popping up in High Times with 420 this and 420 that, saying, no, we're the guys. And they claimed that they came up with it, and they had proof of it, and they had things with salutations, 420 dude, 420 this, on letters, which they saved. And so they do have their evidence. I'm not saying they weren't involved. I'm just kind of saying it's more of a collective effort back then. And, it's nice to kind of give credit to one group, so it makes it an easy storyline, but I think it's a little more complicated than that.
Well, like all things cultural, or cultural memes that take off, there's always at least an originator. But you're right, it doesn't go viral until certain people help uplift it. And obviously you're the guy who helped put that into the mainstream at High Times, which was the center of cannabis media for a few decades, and I think that's an important part for people to realize. In the modern era, we get everything streaming, everything's immediate to us right now, and we really don't have we're almost like a culture with amnesia these days. We don't realize where things come from, print, and the role that the print media had in keeping folks together. Like you said, this is 1990. This is pre-internet, So High Times was the way to get that out to folks, and you being that guy made that happen. So Steve, thank you for your contribution to that. Here we are at a 420. Last 420 myself, I was in DC at the National Cannabis Festival. To think that we went from you putting it in an article to High Times to where there is a giant cannabis festival in our nation's capital, featuring the Wu-Tang Clan on stage, and there's vendors selling cannabis, and there's places to smoke. There's people giving lectures on it. Veterans talking about how it helps with their PTSD. I mean, we have really come a long way. I mean, and then you have parades that you participate in up north. I mean, so it's pretty wild. I mean, Carlos, there's some other pictures that you wanted to show. There's some brand, like Steve was talking about, people brand 420 now. You know, if you want to flash some of them pics, look, there's Hostess Munchies Mobile. That's funny. But yeah, look right there. I mean, you got a 420 Fest, the Mile High Festival in Denver. The Deadheads of Sphere. Oh, that's for later in the show. But yeah, there's tons of stuff around 420, and so
show the photo. Yeah, that's one. Okay, so it's about 2009 or so, 2008. This is University of Colorado at Boulder, and I went to several of their 420 events. And basically, the kids would just let's just say it was on a Wednesday. And and come about 3:45, and the kids start flooding out onto the diag there, and start puffing, and gradually getting to 4:15, 4:20, and there's a huge cloud over the campus with that beautiful mountains in the background. So it's just a great image. It was like a flash mob. The crowd would just show up. And I always thought it was kind of a funny idea. Like, are they going back to class? It was a little late in the day, but still, everybody's getting stoned out there. And the fun thing about that event too, it wasn't, it was kind of quasi-organized. The students just kind of knew to be there. Over several years, it became the tradition to be out there on 420, at 420, on April 20th. And so they kind of knew, so I kind of went around campus, but there was no stage, no speakers, no bands. It's just like a big, crowd. And that's sort of the fun thing. I call it a flash mob. And that was sort of the fun thing about those events. And they took place, but they also kind of got flack from the campus. They didn't like it. And they gradually phased it out. And that also took place, an event like that at Santa Cruz, University of California. Those are the two major 420 events that took place up until now. Now it's become commercialized. Now you have Red Rocks, with big shows, and Wiz Khalifa at Red Rocks, and Method Man and Redman doing their big show tonight up in Albany. And, it's become a big thing for performers, especially in hip hop. It's a good, kind of weekend this year for everybody to make a little money, out there, all the performers getting gigs, playing concerts and stuff like that. On my website, Celeb Stoner, I have a list of the top 420 events, and a lot of them are, just bands like Fish and Dead and Company, Willie Nelson and Melissa Etheridge and Sublime, and whoever are out there touring, the cool bands you might want to see on 420. I mean, that's why I kind of put the Dead and Company at the top of the list of the top 420 events, even though it's not, 420 event per se. The weekend at the Sphere, seeing the Dead is about one of the highest things you could do.
Oh yeah, I mean, and even just thinking about having 420 in Nevada, an adult use state, right? Number one. And this weekend is WrestleMania, which is the largest sporting event outside of the Super Bowl in America. So, I mean, there is just tons of things happening. I recall going to Colorado for 420 back in 2017 and 2018, and just sitting there right in front of the Capitol in Denver, in the park. I mean, people grab a little space, and they have a stage. The original Whalers on stage, and smoking, and then to see cops going through the crowd and writing people $1,000 tickets. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I thought this was Denver, the center of where they legalized it. People are getting public smoking tickets. So for as much progress as we've made, and as much mainstream as cannabis is and 420 has become in the culture, it's still an opportunity, I guess, for some law enforcement agencies to pretty much get all folks into one space and be able to write tickets. But at other places, they treat it like an open container, and it's like, as long as you're in the event area, you're cool. So Steve, what are your thoughts on this mixed bag of where we're at with laws and policies, and can people still safely celebrate 420 without law enforcement harassment?
Well, in legal states for sure, but be careful in the red states. The 26 states where it's not legal except for medical, places like Texas or whatever, be careful today. You could get arrested on 420. It's not a fun thing to say, but here in New York, we're not going to have that problem. Today, there's going to be a big event in Washington Square Park. It's kind of like our flash mob. A few years ago, when things went legal in New York, 420 became a big event. 420 was never a big thing in New York. Nobody paid attention. High Times, we did our thing, which wasn't much, but but we recognized it. And I mean, originally, our first 420 sessions were leaving the office, going to a park, and sitting on a park bench and passing joints underneath the table. Because you get arrested for smoking in public in New York back in those days, and they would grab you. Those are the Giuliani years. So we were careful, but we did go out there and do our thing. We were doing the first, for us, the first 420 events. Actually, the first 420 events took place out in California. There was a good article this week on it in SF Gate online about the series of events that took place in San Francisco, led by Cannabis Action Network and my friend Debbie Goldsberry, when they did their first 420 events at the Maritime Hall, the first commercial 420 events, not just the flash mob where they, you paid to come in to see some bands and have a night of, cannabis culture. And they started that, and that was kind of cool. So it kind of, picked up at that point. That's when the events really began, commercial events. I mean, now the event in Colorado is a pay event, and they put up fences, and it costs $25. So that's where it's gone. I'm not against that necessarily. I'm not against the commercialization of 420. It's okay, let people make money on this day. And if it works better to have a 25, it's not that expensive to see a concert these days. So to see Bone Thugs and Harmony and a few other hip hop bands, that's not, really bad. So, I mean, Denver's been a hub for 420 for years, with concerts at, at Red Rocks and constant, great lineups and stuff. But I'm noticing things shifting this year to New York. New York has more events than any place around the country that I can see. So it's interesting how New York is has a sort of 420 takeover going on, even though it's not nowhere close to where it started.
Well, I think that plays a lot into the way New York set up its public smoking laws, in the sense that you can smoke cannabis down the street in New York City, anywhere you can smoke a cigarette,
That's a good point, because that's the law there in New York, and we have the benefit of that. So yeah, you can have, even though that event in Washington Square Park is technically not a legal event and it's not permitted, the cops just leave it alone. To go in there with 10,000 people and try and bust it up, that would be a real problem. The crowd wouldn't take lightly to, pulling people out of the crowd and arresting them. So New York has no intention of doing that. But at the same time, it's they have rules against smoking in parks. The rule in New York, the tobacco rule is like no tobacco in parks and beaches. For some reason, they don't want you to clutter up, I guess, beaches and parks with, with butts or something, cigarette, butts and I guess roaches. So it's a little, it can be sort of strict in that way, but they don't enforce the law on this day. They kind of let it go unless I go there today or there's some sort of change, which I really would doubt.
Well, we have a similar thing in Tampa when we have our annual Gasparilla Festival, and everybody dresses up like pirates and gets drunk. So, and the police kind of just let public drinking go out the window that day, as long as you stay on the parade route drinking. So I kind of get that with the cops and how they have those laissez-faire attitudes.
And there hasn't been a problem. What I've noticed in the last few years is that event's gotten a little more commercial. You'll actually see some commercial brands set up, like, not legally, because you really can't sell stuff. The licensed brands can't sell in a park. They can't just set up a tent and sell in the park. It doesn't work that way. They have to do everything through the rules. But I've noticed some companies popping up last year, taking advantage of the opportunity of the crowd in that park. So it's become a little bit more commercial, even though it's not a commercial event. So it's evolving, and I'll see what it's like this year. But pretty much it'll just be a lot of people in the park, a lot of music being played, because Washington Square has a lot of little zones for like jazz and this or that. And so you'll hear some music and you'll be a lot of just festive, but it's very disorganized. There's no central focus. There's not even a countdown. But there is a countdown today in Times Square, and that's a first. And I'm going there next after Washington Square. I'll be there for an hour or two, meet up with some friends and smoke with some people, and then continue on up to Times Square for a first time event, which is a countdown, right where they do the ball drop countdown for New Year's Eve. same spot in the heart of Times Square, and it's being coordinated by Zigzag and Cannabis Now magazine and a big dispensary in Times Square that's new. And I'm going there to see what they come up with. I'm curious to see a 420 countdown, literally, because we always like a countdown on 420, right? And sometimes, like Washington Square, it goes right by. Nobody even, like, they're so stoned, nobody even knows that 420 just happened. There's no like 10, 9, 8, none of that. It just sort of happens. You see a lot of smoke in the air. Okay, it's 420, but there's no official countdown. So I'm looking forward to an official Times Square countdown today. That could be interesting. And they're going to use like the big screen that they use in all those big, video screens in Times Square, with the one right there where the ball drop is, and they're going to be showing like imagery, cannabis imagery, and I don't know, Zigzag stuff or whatever. But it should be kind of interesting. I don't know if it'll be on the news, but so I'm going to check that out as as an alternative to just hanging out in the park all day and not doing a whole lot other than just.
I was just thinking the next step for that would be to like broadcast it on TV, and then everybody in the U.S. just like.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I hope, since Cannabis Now is doing it, and, maybe they'll do some live Facebook or something like that. It's kind of like, I probably won't do that, but others, maybe they will, since they're organizing it, or Zigzag or somebody will have like, so people can at least watch what's going on there from, say, 4 o'clock to 4:20 there, 4:30, whatever's happening. But it's, I don't know if there's any celebrity. I heard Mike Tyson was there last year. I don't know if there's any celebrity going to be there to help kind of kick it off. It would be cool if they did. I was hoping Carmelo Anthony would be there because he's been all over New York the last couple of days hyping his new brand. He launched in the last couple of days a new brand, the basketball player Carmelo. So I was hoping maybe he would be the one, but it would help bring attention to it with a couple of celebs and stuff. So they're working on it. It's maybe next year it'll be bigger, this Times Square thing, but they're just developing it, as the years go on.
Well, just the statement you made a couple of minutes ago, new dispensary in Times Square. To make that statement 20 years ago, it would have been like ludicrous. Like, are you a crazy person? What are you talking about?
Right.
And now it's like, wow, here's where we're at. But, like you pointed out earlier, too, it's still illegal in half of this country, especially a huge swath throughout the Bible Belt, if you will, the like you pointed, many red states.
Hey, your state. So I mean,
yeah.
What are you guys doing down in Florida for 420, and how are you protecting yourselves?
Exactly. There are events. There are a lot of pop-up style events. There are some educational events across the state. For our chapter in Suncoast, we actually had our big events we typically do the week before to give folks the opportunity to celebrate and do other things. Last week, we had what we call our Best Blunt in the Bay rolling competition. And Carlos, I know you got some pics from that. This is like one of the biggest criminal justice reform fundraisers of the year for Suncoast NORML. And I mean, we literally have folks from all across the state of Florida come out and prove that they can roll the best blunt. I'm even rocking the shirt here for the Best Blunt in the Bay. Those were our judges there up front. Being a judge in the competition is amazing because you smoke all the entries and you score them. That was in the final round. Someone rolled a cross joint. That's my son holding the championship belt. So this was a good year because folks went home with championship belts. That's our events director, Carlos. That was the defending champ, Indica. She actually was, 3 years in a row, a lady has gone home with the belt. And this year we had tag team belts, which was awesome. That was the team that won. And then Todd won. He's our first male contestant ever to go home with the belt after 4 years of competition. So it was a lot of fun. And of course, Carlos is our designated referee, kept everything fair and enforced all the rules. So
you're out.
Yeah,
you're out.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'm obnoxious with my whistle, bro.
It was pretty fun. A lot of fun. We had a great time. Shout out to Ian Beckles and the Dignitary Cafe for hosting it this year. Thank you to our VIP sponsor, Cookie Pies, who sponsored the VIP experience. Slappy Mama Food Truck, thank you for coming out and serving up some great vittles, and to all the vendors and participants, judges. It was just a great time. So that's what we did essentially for an early 420 celebration. Today is more laid back for our members, and we would like them to participate in different events around the state. So Gary, how are you celebrating 420 today? I know you're chilling. What are your thoughts?
I tried to make some infused peeps yesterday, but they didn't work out.
Infused peeps. Okay.
I couldn't get the eyes right for some odd reason.
Gary, I figured you'd be making some matzo brie.
Yeah, I've been living on matzo brie for the last week, and my digestive system is taking its toll. But
Yeah,
I'm
you
grateful to get
mentioned
some.
that earlier. I didn't know matzo makes you poop.
I don't know what he's
No,
talking
it's the
about.
opposite.
I don't subscribe to his theory, but matzo brie is like a eggy dish where you put matzo in with eggs and you make like a matzo omelet.
It sounds like something's wrong with Gary's matzo.
Well, maybe Gary, you can make some infused oil and then make you some infused matzo with some kosher kush. That's I think that lines up with dietary kashrut law, right?
You could definitely also, you could make with the eggs and use a cannabis butter and stuff like that and start from scratch there and have a little infused matzo brie, which I didn't do yet. Maybe I'll do that this morning on my last day, as we finish up our 8-day Jewish Lent.
That's interesting. Steve, this is interesting because I know the Catholics have the same thing. It's like eggs don't count as meat. so
it's not an issue. Meat is not an issue on. I'm a vegetarian, but meat's not an issue on Passover. You eat all the meat you want. The issues are bread, grains, pastas, rice, things, the fillers, the carbs.
Yeah,
that you don't eat on Passover. So you kind of it's a lean diet, at least for me, because I've eaten a lot of eggs and soup and salad this week and sweets, a lot of macaroons and stuff.
Well, man, look, I want to thank you for coming on, giving us the history of 420. We know you have an action-packed day today yourself there in New York, and I just wanted to give you the opportunity to tell folks where they can follow you, where they can learn more about all the great things you got going on, and anything you got coming up that folks should know about.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Always go to Celeb Stoner for the latest in celebrity cannabis news, celebstoner.com. I welcome people to join my group at Patreon. It's a Celeb Stoner group. I do a newsletter every week. I've done newsletters for the last 5 years at Patreon, over 400 newsletters. Check out the news that way. And today's a great day, for everybody to go out there and support the industry, support the stores. They're all offering great discounts. Go and get a 50% off, today and stock up. It's a great day it's usually the best day of the year for the retailers. So support the retailers today as well.
Hey, great plug. If you're in a state where it's not legal for adult use, support your local small business drug dealer.
Them too.
Yeah, exactly. Your legacy, I believe the proper term is support your local legacy market plug. So, well, Steve, thank you, man. We appreciate you, and thanks for being a great guest. And as always, you're welcome on the rotation anytime.
I love it. I love the show. One of my favorite podcasts. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining us.
What an honor.
Yeah. So I am honored. Carlos, Steve is definitely part of cannabis culture. He's there on the Mount Rushmore when it comes to activism, right next to the folks who have been in the trenches of this for the past several decades. Like other folks who've been on the show, like Malcolm McKinnon, Keith Stropp, who founded NORML. I mean, when it comes to folks really putting it on the line for everybody, I think these are folks who have really done the hard work to make that happen. Jack Hare, who definitely belongs in that Mount Rushmore as well. So I'm definitely glad we have Steve on the show today. Now, next up coming on the show is the current chairman who is of NORML, who's actually been on the show before, Joe Bondi, who we're going to bring on from backstage. Joe was he was vice chair previously. Last time he was on the show. Now he's coming back on as the chair of NORML, being elected by the board of directors to chair the organization. An organization that's been around for over 50 years, as I just mentioned, founded by Keith Stropp, that has made a difference in the lives of so many folks. And connecting even generations of folks in activism. So, Joe, welcome to the rotation.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It's nice to be back. How are you?
We're all great, man. We're having a great 420, and this show's early enough for folks to still be able to get out and have fun in their day. I know you're up in New York. Steve Bloom was just talking about all the great things happening in NYC today. What's happening in your neck of the woods? What do you got going on this 420?
I'm gonna do a little bit of work actually. I'm recovering. I took a hike with my wife yesterday and collected a whole bunch of rocks on the Appalachian Trail. We hiked like almost 14 miles, so I'm recovering. And today I'm going to do what I do on a lot of 420s, which is like free the captive and help people in pot matters. And I've got 2 pot matters I'm working on today. I'm very proud. One is a client of mine. I had won what we call a proximity variance for, allowing him to have a marijuana retail store within 1,000 feet of another store. It's a really great guy, great client. He's the person that turned Bushwick into like a living art gallery. And I won this variance, and it took a lot of work, and we persuaded the Office of Cannabis Management that it was like within the public use and convenience to have another store, right? Particularly so since we've got so many of these legacy market operators in New York, and you know, how you gonna mitigate that problem if you don't have more licensed stores? But a couple months after it was granted, the license holder complained and sued the Office of Cannabis Management, complaining that they arbitrarily granted the variance that I spent months fighting for them to grant, right? So I moved to do what we call intervene in the case, to become like a party in the case so I could be heard, and that was granted. And now I'm filing my brief to kind of like in support of dismissal of the action tomorrow, right? Because it wasn't arbitrary, it wasn't capricious, and like that guy deserves a license under the cannabis law. So that's matter one. And the other is I'm submitting a brief to an administrative law judge about, like, I've been arguing for a long time that in New York City, a lot of these searches and seizures of these unlicensed stores violated the Fourth Amendment. They violated people's constitutional rights. Whatever like temporary emergency the authorities were attempting to abate was a lot more enduring than the problem of the stores. So ultimately, another NORML National Legal Committee member, Josh Bachner, raised this same argument that I've been raising in connection with the illegal merchants, in connection with a bunch of hemp merchants, and lo and behold, he won a very favorable decision. So I'm arguing in my administrative hearing, which has been, continuing for some time, that decision has to be applied retroactively. And in doing so, my client, everything that was seized has to be suppressed. The store has to be reopened. There can't be any penalty or fine imposed. And by the way, he's like a young dad who had a hemp retail store, right? Excellent guy, no criminal record, no criminal involvement whatsoever. And the padlocking of his store has like destroyed the family. So I'm continuing those battles today, and I think it's really kind of apt. And at the same time, I'll be rejoicing in cannabis as a consumer product, and in New York as a consumer-friendly state. I saw Steve, last few minutes of him, and I will be down at Washington Square Park joining him and a few other people. And I got invited down there by an activist many of us know named Dana Beal, and I'm sure I'm going to run into a number of people that I'm friendly with. So I'll do that for a little while, and then the rest of the day is really that. That's my long answer to your short question.
Well, very cool, man. Very cool. And I think you bring some great points up, and so many folks who have been in the legacy market for so long have been supplying folks who have needed relief, who suffer from chronic debilitating conditions. Now that cannabis has gone corporate, folks still struggle with high taxes that we're experiencing in many states. Folks struggle with regulatory barriers because you got to get a card like in Florida before you can get access. And then even still, you deal with quality control issues at certain dispensaries. You deal with high prices because obviously these investments and investors are trying to make their money back on the back end. All in all, the transition to go from being a legacy market person to operating in the legal market has so many hoops to jump through. It seems almost impossible. And then you bring up these issues where you have legacy market folks wanting to transition. Then you have other folks that are just like, screw the paperwork and the bureaucracy. I'm just going to make a pop-up shop until I get busted. And then all in all, even if you are doing it legally, you can still be harassed by law enforcement. And I say all that to bring up that recently the Florida 2nd District Court of Appeals reversed a marijuana trafficking conviction because prosecution failed to take adequate steps to distinguish whether a defendant possessed marijuana or hemp. And this was a defendant had been convicted of marijuana trafficking after he was intercepted at Tampa International Airport in Florida with a duffel bag. They had 50 vacuum sealed bags of a leafy green substance, and the canine even alerted to the duffel bag. Law enforcement later provided one of the 50 bags for chemical analysis, and they said it tested positive for cannabis. The defendant appealed his conviction and argued that he believed those packages had hemp products in them, which are legal federally and legal in Florida for now. And the court agreed and opined that there was no way to determine whether the defendant was carrying hemp or marijuana absent the analytical testing of every single bag. And then the court said legal hemp and illegal cannabis are indistinguishable by appearance, texture, and odor. Because there is an identifiable danger of misidentification between legal hemp and illegal cannabis, where the contents of multiple packages are be considered improving the quantity of illegal cannabis, the state can no longer rely solely on appearance and odor to extend an inference of illegal cannabis to the remaining untested packets, and must chemically test each packet to meet the threshold weight required for trafficking. Otherwise, basically they're violating this guy's rights. So a couple things, essentially drug dogs in Florida need to be retired. Number one, because you can't tell with the odor. I mean, the dog can't tell if it's 0.3% THC in it. He just knows, he's been trained to sniff it, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm picking up those essential oils. So yeah, that's the dog's gonna alert. So that's definitely an interesting point to see come up. Joe, what are your thoughts on this whole? We have legal hemp in various states. I mean, even in illegal states like Texas, they have hemp products because they're federally legal.
Well, a few things. First off, I thought your explication of the Florida state case was very good, and I compare that to like the old cases you had with the Farm Bill in 2018 and marijuana being removed from the Controlled Substances Act. I'll just give you the federal analog because it covers like all the states. You had a lot of people saying, my conviction was like unlawfully obtained because it was fucking hemp, right? And the courts had routinely said, oh, no, you should have raised the hemp as an affirmative defense so we could test it and put on evidence or refute it or whatever. And I think all of those cases in the federal circuit courts lost. But now, indeed, you have, and I had one in New York, right, which was another one of these store operators, licensed hemp dealer, who happened to have Delta 8, 9 products rather that are legal in New York. And he also had some mushrooms that were called Amanita Magic mushrooms, but of course they were like chocolate infused with reishi and lion's mane and some ashwagandha, a little caffeine for good measure, and they weren't controlled substances. But the entire case I managed to get dismissed criminally, and now I'm dealing with like the tax repercussions of the whole thing, right? The penalties still, it just goes on and on and on. But I got it dismissed because, of course, the lab reports came back as not controlled substances. And in the states, it really matters. And it matters in the feds too. But just any of these cases up front, this is what lawyers should be saying, is if you've got a client with a hemp defense, you got to kind of raise it. I had a guy call me the other day. It was so unfortunate. I thought it was Mount Vernon, New York, but it was way in the middle of the country. And it was a trucker who'd been busted with half a ton of what was lawful hemp, essentially, and obviously detained and arrested. Moreover, a senior citizen. So I'm pretty sure he got out, but I need to check the postscript. So I think that's a really good trend. But in terms of, was your question about states? Are we talking about our states 2.0?
I just wanted to get your 2 cents on this whole hemp thing, because in Florida it boiled over to a head in the last election, because you had focus groups being run by essentially the anti-legalization campaign that was funded ironically, and we'll talk a little bit later in the news about this, from the governor's office, through money that he moved around through different committees. But all in all, they beat it by just a little bit. And there were 2 key points. One was that obviously there wasn't any home grow allowed, but we have a single issue test when it comes to the Supreme Court certifying an amendment to be on the ballot. So we've had home grow in other legalization petitions, and it caused the whole petition to get thrown out. So the last election, home grow obviously is something that would have to be separate. Clearly, just legalizing for adult use is what they did, and it did pass Supreme Court muster, and it made it on there. But that was one issue. So a lot of cannabis activists, that was a red line for them, that, and a point of agitation for folks who didn't want to see it pass, and for folks who have an axe to grind with big cannabis. And then the other part was, essentially the hemp operators that are in Florida and in other states have really had beef with the fact that big cannabis has been trying to corner the market when it comes to selling any type of cannabinoid. And that you got these big major companies, the multi-state operators that are pushing their government relations, their lobbyists, to pass boilerplate legislation all around the country. We've obtained copies of it, where we've even seen Trulieve push a boilerplate ban on hemp products for anybody but them, licensed dispensaries to sell hemp products. And Carlos, who's our deputy director and studio engineer there, is actually broadcasting from his own hemp and mushroom dispensary there in Tampa, Florida. Carlos, I just wanted to get your 2 cents, and maybe you could fill Joe in a little bit about, look at your shop. You do everything above the books, you do everything right, but for some reason you have big cannabis trying to put you out of business. And I mean, I think that's a major issue that a lot of folks are dealing with. I mean, hell, the legislature right now is trying to make selling any type of mushroom product illegal, even if it's just for scientific purposes.
I gotta say, and Carlos, do correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, everything we're talking about here, every single solitary issue that we're talking about, a legacy market, or like this big industry or business or whatever the heck it is all because cannabis is not, and I've said this before as a mantra, and I'll explain it so that people don't think I'm insane. Marijuana should be legal like lettuce. That's how it should be, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't mean it should be untested and unsafe or, God forbid, untaxed, right? But like, the barriers to entry are high. They cause friction. There's divide. When I was a cannabis activist only trying to further legalization and free people from, federal and state penitentiaries, everyone was together on this, right? We're all together on legalizing marijuana. And then when we legalized marijuana, all of a sudden there became like a battle, like I was explaining before, the turf war over the corner, right? These are people who frequently are coming out, and particularly in the early stages, they're like going from being pirates to joining the Navy, and now they're like all agitated and forget their legacy, right? Like, marijuana was something that was supposed to bring us together, not have high barriers to entry, involve like racial quotas or social equity quotas, involve the need for like investors who are going to try to take a huge share of your business, involve the need for people to be siloed in particular areas. This is all BS. You should be able to get, right? And like I collect plants, right? You could get a nursery license in the state of New York for $100, and I would get a nursery license. But the problem with all these licenses, and I'm a criminal lawyer, I'm fundamentally opposed to this shit, is that the agriculture inspector could come in and look for aphids, right? But for $100, you could get this kind of license. If marijuana licenses were available for $100, look in New York at the problem. If we had a free market economy and these thousands of stores could enter the tax portal, so to speak, for $100 and sell marijuana that came from all over the place, which is kind of like the States Act that we'll get to, right? Like, what would be the beef? Would the sky fall? No. We'd be brought closer together. And for me, this is all a sideshow. Like, marijuana is supposed to bring us together about critically important issues. We're supposed to be sitting down with people and talking about like protecting ourselves and moving forward as a nation. Instead, it's become something, and maybe this is on a state by state level, that is exclusionary and causes us to argue. You wouldn't be probably out there making synthetically derived cannabinoids, and saying they're hemp products, which is what a lot of these are, if in fact you could just sell weed, right? Yeah. And a lot of these stores, and you're looking at these operators, they'd rather sell fucking pot, excuse my language. But the sky.
We're not regulated by the FCC. You can say whatever the fuck you want, Joe.
And then these people in New York, like, here's what happened, right? You had a community of people that had convenience stores in the epicenter of marijuana, and marijuana was legal. The police said, we're not going to bust you, right? The law said you can gift people 3 ounces of flour and 25 grams of concentrate. And stores emerged because there was no mechanism to go apply for a license, right? And now these people, instead of just being arrested and let go and having to like do community service are sometimes facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax penalties and fines because they dared to sell cannabis. And then the authorities say, oh, it's just administrative, some civil things, not a big deal. But the way it broke was most of these stores are owned by immigrant communities, Yemeni communities, right? People from Hispanic communities, people from African communities, and they sold pot in the big city, and then they got put out. Like they got put out of business, they got padlocked, they suffered enormous losses at the hands of multiple authorities that ran into their stores in obvious violation of the Fourth Amendment, trampling on their rights with guns and zip ties and threats of enforcement, not like a clipboard and some regulatory inspection. And it's despicable conduct. All of these things, everything that you can point to as a problem would be mitigated or obliterated if marijuana was just legal like lettuce. And that's what it comes down to. It's like, are you a consumer, a business person, whatever? You think you're so good at making an extract or a strain or selling cannabis or public relations or branding? Well, then do it in a free market economy, right?
Well, I think that's the problem, Joe, is that the free market is just an idea these days because our political system is pay to play. You know, so if you want
exactly what I wanted, like that's exactly what I'm thinking about here, Joe. Like I'm sorry to cut you off, Keno, but
no, I'm glad. I wanted you to talk, please.
I was thinking about earlier in the show, I was thinking about how me and Keno and Gary met. And at this time, it was 10 years ago. It was like 2014. And we were all activists, right? And we were just used to getting in front of a group of people and talking about how this plant should be legalized. And if somebody would have told me that corporate cannabis would take over, or there would be this idea of hemp of 0.3% THC or anything like that, and there would have been all this divide and everything like that, I don't think I would have believed it. And you know, I and I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm listening to what this movement should be and what we wanted it to be so long ago. And you know, Keno brings up a point. Is this just an idealistic thought? Can a free cannabis industry actually exist in America? Just the fact that somebody, you know, I mean, look what happened in Florida. Let's turn it on the hemp industry, right? The hemp industry found out that they were going to be taken out by big cannabis. So they were able to strike a deal with our governor. We will help fund the no to legalization campaign if you let us just operate just for one more year. That's what we got. One more year of operation. So like, and they were able to screw over, I think the statistic is tens of thousands of people that get arrested in Florida every year, you know, just to be able to survive for one more year. Is this an idealistic situation? What are we doing? Should we just like move and start another country or something? Or I don't know.
Listen, I think we got to go back to our root. You got to go back to the core. First off, we go back in our lives and travel back, and as we do, we should pause on those moments when we can be deeply proud of the shit we've accomplished, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to go back to your root when you're a kid smoking weed and everyone had that discussion, like, what would it be like if it was legal? Oh, the great is legal. And if you grew up during like the Reagan years, and Nancy Reagan, Just Say No to Drugs, or with Joe Biden demonizing people as super predators, or Bill Clinton and the Mandatory Minimum Sentencing Reform Act. I mean, you think about this shit, these things impacted the lives of hundreds of people whom I've represented. But when you were a kid smoking weed, you couldn't have fathomed, as you said, Carlos, anything that's happened today. You couldn't fathom these like industry manufactured marijuana products, right? You thought more of like landrace and unique strains and cool cultivars and a cool vibe and people who are, you know, freely exchanging ideas and talking to each other. You weren't thinking about standing on the line at a dispensary and showing like your ID, or in the early days going through a metal detector or whatever it was, or needing to be a patient, needing to be sick to smoke weed. That wasn't like anywhere in your head. You couldn't possibly have fathomed that, right?
Right.
So marijuana is more like a social fulcrum. It's more a geopolitical unifying influence for me. And it's something that can bring us all together. But I do think that we need to persist. And moments matter, right? Like 10 years ago when you guys met, that moment mattered. And remember that moment mattered, right? Remember it now, mattered. And the things that you believed mattered. And like I said before, be proud of that stuff, but don't give up. You got to move it forward. And to me, legal like lettuce is more and more. And I remember I raised this to the NORML board. It's like, we're doing a public service announcement campaign, right? And people looked at me aside, but I didn't mean it like children should have access to pot. God forbid the children have access to cannabis, or that you've got like bad weed that's shitty and filled with pesticides. I meant it in terms of availability and price, right? And the way we look at it. So I think that is upon us. And if I could just briefly pivot to the states 2.0, which I think is an interesting piece of legislation that was.
Well, Joe, before you do that, I want to bring up a good point.
Yeah.
Carlos has actually written a book. It was one of the first publications we put out as a chapter about how to talk to your kids about cannabis in this new era. And it's available on Amazon. We even passed out QR codes at our first 4th of July parade in Temple Terrace, Florida, to let them know, like, hey, you can scan this, download this book, how to talk to your kids about weed. And I think that's important. And you're right. All the issues that we're experiencing is because of this patchwork of laws, because of the pay-to-play political system, and it all boils down to cannabis is still Schedule 1 on the Controlled Substances Act. And ironically, there is bipartisan legislation in Congress that was just filed on Thursday. It was Rep. David Joyce, who's a Republican from Ohio, and Max Miller from Ohio, and Diana Titus from Nevada, who announced that there is filed the Strengthening the 10th Amendment through Entrusting the States 2.0 Act. And so, Joe, I know you've been following this very closely because, we saw the MORE Act get passed a few years back and nothing happened with that. We heard that Chuck Schumer in the Senate had a cannabis one, but this one is coming from the House, and the House is always, we always say what the Senate's like a library and the House is like a circus. But the fact that you can get bipartisanship in the House is important. Having Democrats and Republicans working together, where that's one of the few places where you don't see a lot of deals being made. So, Joe, what are your thoughts on finally allowing legal states to just have it and not have all these federal restrictions?
It's closer to legal like lettuce, but I mean, when we look at states that was initially introduced in December of 2023,
yeah,
and in terms of just indomitable spirit, or at least for 18 months, whatever that's worth, you've got Joyce coming back. And what's interesting is how something that was passed in a Democratic congressional time or introduced failed to pass. And we now have the co-chair of the Cannabis Congressional Caucus, David Joyce, a Republican from Ohio, putting together a pretty cool piece. I mean, what he said before and what he's reintroduced would allow for states that have made marijuana legal. And that's the title, right? 10th Amendment, strengthening the 10th Amendment through entrusting the states, right? So we're going to entrust those states that have made marijuana legal by descheduling, removing marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act in those states. Now, that's some heavy shit, because that means you don't have to be a patient like Schedule 3 would require you to be to have marijuana access in all of these states. And as a business, you are assured of the fact that you don't need to go out and get a DEA license for the purpose of manufacturing, cultivating, processing, dispensing a controlled substance. And you are assured of the fact that you get a 280E deduction. Moreover, and here's something that scares maybe state protective industries like the New York farmer would be very concerned about the free flow of cannabis and interstate commerce from tribal lands or different states, right? It would allow for Humboldt County farmers, for example, to have marijuana trucked to New York, and all along the way for the transportation to be deemed legal and lawful, so the truck couldn't be stopped on the road, right? I mean,
you get stopped in Kansas, you get stopped in Idaho, you get stopped in Texas.
Big deal. It may not be good for New York farmers, right? And they'd say, "Oh my God, our New York but it's really good for this notion of cannabis and pushing the envelope of cannabis legality. And it also, because for me, and of course, NORML sought to be deemed an interested party in the now failed rescheduling hearings. But for me, I have always believed that marijuana should be descheduled. And rescheduling, we talk about things that move incrementally slow, like law is one of those things. How fast does law move? You're going to make marijuana a Schedule 3 drug. It'll be a Schedule 3 drug by the time I'll be dead. It'll be a Schedule 3 drug. So what states does is, first off, it doesn't stop marijuana from being rescheduled as a Schedule 3 drug, but it removes from the scheduling entirely marijuana in those states that elected through whether ballot referendum or like their legislative action to legalize pot. And that's a pretty big deal. And
allows tribes to self-determine if they want to sell it.
I was going to say, see, here's the canard. This is like a freaking canard. We're going to go tell the sovereign nations that oftentimes have treaties with us. Actually, only a few now have treaties with us, right? Mostly executive orders. But we've always talked about sovereign nations, right? Now we're going to go tell the sovereign what they can do. I mean, it's just ridiculous. By the way, the one thing that you and I, other than probably a lot, breathing and eating and being on this show, but something else we share in common right now, and any listener and anyone who will ever listen to this show, is that we're all sitting or standing on tribal land. Right now, you're on tribal land, brother. So that's kind of how it is. And that's a fascinating revelation, because in my experience representing some extraordinary members of the cannabis community who are tribal members, they're really talented at what they're doing with cannabis. Good. I know we're towards the end of the show. I want to leave you with a stone. I want to show you my stone. You see this stone?
Mm-hmm.
You see how it's got like pieces of stone in it?
Yeah.
It's a composite, right? And this is like Steve Bloom could be one, right? Carlos is one. You're one. Gary's one. Like it's Keith Straub. We're going to give him a big stone over here somewhere. Randy, everyone's a stone. And this becomes a wall, right? This is just this little kind of thing I collected in a riverbed. But we're all part of this amazing movement. And even where we disagree, right, and we can argue about it, it's moving ourselves forward. But I'm really buoyed up to see that there's any kind of an opportunity for us to speak in a bipartisan way, using cannabis as maybe that beginning foundational point. And wouldn't that be an amazing piece of poetry? That cannabis is the thing that begins to bring us together. We've all known it for a long time, since you were in the schoolyard, right? Since those 420 kids. And so I think it would be an amazing poetic step forward.
Well, thank you for everything you said, Joe, because I'm actually reminded of our last conversation now, where I think we phrased it as we've taken 3 steps forward and then brought 2 steps back. You know, and that could just be frustrating. I'm definitely feeling it right now.
Yeah.
You know, you think it should be just easy. Just I love that. The whole idea, just regulate it like lettuce. You know, it makes so much fucking sense. But it also seems like you know, as we bring down a barrier, the people that go and move on past that barrier just tend to put up another barrier behind them. Well, and it becomes very difficult. And I guess now is exactly the point where it's like we just can't give up. We just got to keep moving, just got to remember the good times and be proud of the accomplishments that we've made, and just continue.
And that's really the spirit of 420 today, Carlos. Just spark one up to remember the good times, and let's keep trucking forward. Because
get back to our roots. Just get in circles.
Spark it up. And you know what? Be the spark. Like, be the light. And if you're in pain, you're all like hurt, and we all are, right? Like, focus on that a little bit, because that's where your light's going to enter. Yeah. I thank you so much for having me today, Chris. I really appreciated the opportunity to be here with you guys again, and to share what is like really becoming a pretty well-known and cool holiday. So thank you.
Well, Joe, you're welcome to come back on the rotation anytime. We're always welcome to hear from National NORML and what is going on across the country. And thanks for talking about the States Act, which I think is, again, an important bipartisan part of, you know, what's going on. We got here As you mentioned, it was not just the Reagans and the Republicans. It was Clinton and Biden and the Democrats. We have gotten here by a joint fuck up of political parties. It is going to take a joint solution of political parties to get us out of this fucked up situation where people are going to jail over a plant that grows in the ground. For those who are believers, over a God-given remedy that we've all been granted to utilize for the benefit of mankind. And for some reason, the powers that be don't want us utilizing it. So, and with all that, Carlos, I think it's time for the news. So at the top of the news hour, I'm going to go ahead and run down some studies, and then we'll get into states level news, and then we're going to close out with a quick discussion of what's happening in Florida, and Gary's going to give us an update. But first, at the top of the news hour, I think it's important. An analysis come out that says legalization has significantly displaced the illicit cannabis market in Canada. Legalizing adult use marijuana in Canada has led to an immediate and sustained decline in illicit market cannabis sales, according to data published in the International Journalism of Drug Policy. Researchers affiliated with McMaster University in Ontario assessed Canadian marijuana market trends during the 5 years immediately following legalization, and they report that recreational cannabis legalization implementation was followed by an immediate reduction and sustained declining trend in illegal cannabis markets, suggesting that legalization is achieving one of the government goals by keeping profits out of the hands of what they call criminals. The decline additionally means that fewer people are consuming products from an unregulated market with unknown safety profiles and potential contaminants. The study's authors concluded that recreational cannabis legalization in Canada appears to achieving one of its primary goals by displacing the illegal cannabis market. The findings are consistent with prior data finding that only 4% of Canadian cannabis consumers acknowledge purchasing cannabis products from unregulated sources. Data from the United States similarly reports that growing percentage of American consumers are transitioning to the legal marketplace. According to a 2023 study, 52% of consumers residing in legal states said that they primarily source their cannabis products from brick and mortar establishments. By contrast, only 6% of respondents said that they primarily purchase cannabis from a dealer. Many consumers residing in non-legal states also report frequently traveling to neighboring legal states to purchase their licensed cannabis products and return home with them. Now, Canada legalized adult use in 2018, and public support for the policy remains high, with about 6 to 10% of Canadians currently endorsing legalization. So, I mean, look, we're in an interesting space here in America and Florida. Overall, coming next on the news, a Republican-leaning poll finds there is no demographic group that doesn't believe cannabis should be legal. Voters strongly supporting legalizing cannabis and other marijuana-related policy reforms, according to a national survey data compiled by the firm Fabrizio Lee and Associates and first reported by Marijuana Moment. And NORML is also reporting on this. This poll, which includes an oversampling of Republicans, find that 66% of respondents support legalizing the adult use of marijuana. 68% believe that states should be able to determine their own marijuana policies free from the federal government's interference, and 70% believe that it should be rescheduled federally. Republican voters expressed support for legalization by a double-digit margin. The electorate is clearly ready for cannabis to be legalized for adult use. The pollsters summarized in an accompanying memo, and they said that there is no significant political or demographic group that doesn't believe cannabis should be legal for consenting adults. I mean, look, the American public are where they are. The shocking fact that our politicians haven't gotten it right is just astounding. Now, looking at when we talk about why people feel this way, the largest ever analysis of medical marijuana to treat cancer symptoms have shown an overwhelming scientific consensus on the benefit. Researchers published what they described as the largest meta-analysis ever conducted on medical cannabis and its effects on cancer-related symptoms. They find an overwhelming scientific consensus on marijuana therapeutic effects. This study, which was published in the journals Frontiers in Oncology, analyzed data from over 10,641 peer-reviewed studies. What authors say is more than 10 times the number in the next largest review on the topic. Results indicate a strong and growing consensus within the scientific community regarding the therapeutic effects of cannabis, particularly in the context of cancer. Given what the report calls a scattered and heterogeneous state of research into therapeutic potentials of marijuana, authors aim to systematically assess the existing literature on medical cannabis, focus on its therapeutic potential, its safety profiles, and role in cancer treatment. Now, they said we expected controversy. What we found was actually overwhelming scientific consensus. And this is one of the clearest and most dramatic validations of medical cannabis in cancer care that the scientific community has ever seen. The meta-analysis showed that for every one study that showed that cannabis was ineffective, there were 3 that showed that it worked. A 3-to-1 ratio, especially in a field as rigorous as biomedical research, isn't just unusual, it's extraordinary. The Institute added that the level of consensus found here rivals or exceeds for many FDA-approved medications. So I want to be clear about a couple things. Number one, when you hear a politician say we need more research, they're full of shit. When you hear a politician say, oh, this isn't safe, what about the kids? They're gaslighting you. And third, when you hear, oh, this needs to be FDA approved, like you're going to hear from most of the anti-marijuana legalization activism groups, again, they're full of shit. So you have the scientific analysis, which clearly is conclusive, has overwhelming evidence. Now, before we jump in to talking about Florida, I did want to give a great shout out to the folks in the General Assembly here in Maryland who wrapped up their legislative session a couple weeks ago. And the fact that the Maryland House and Senate have sent to Governor Wes Moore's desk Senate Bill 432, which requires state officials to automatically shield from public view records associated with past low-level marijuana convictions. The bill stipulates that the Maryland Judiciary Case Search Database may no longer in any way refer to the existence of records of a charge of possession of cannabis in a case where the electronic records, if charged, resulted in a conviction that was later pardoned by the governor. Understand that last year, Democratic Governor Wes Moore has signed an executive order that pardoned over 175,000 Maryland residents with misdemeanor marijuana-related convictions. And Maryland legalized adult-use cannabis in 2023. The pardons, which may be issued by the executive branch, forgive past crimes, but they do not shield the records of those crimes from public view or expunge them. And this is a great step towards making sure that that happens, that people aren't, even though you're forgiven for your crime, you're not saddled with these records. So the Expungement Reform Act of 2025 was a great piece of legislation. I just wanted to give a great shout out to Maryland Senate President Bill Ferguson, Senator Charles, Senator Ellis, Senator Henson, Senator Hedelman, Senator King, Senator West, Senator Smith, Senator Wallstriker, Senator Love, Senator Muse, and Senator Sidnor for their sponsorship of the bill. Shout out to all the members of the General Assembly and the Maryland Senate who voted for it. And that's how we should be moving policy forward in the state of Florida. But the state of Florida, again, we talked about, has a very heavy pay-to-play policy. And Gary, I'm glad you got your cell phone going so we can talk about this. One of the biggest things that is happening right now in Florida is a scandal involving the First Lady of Florida, Casey DeSantis, Governor Ron DeSantis' wife, and the foundation that she essentially was put in charge of, kind of founded, called the Hope Florida Foundation, which received contributions from Simply Healthcare Plans and Centenine, which also were vendors for Medicaid in Florida, and they ended up overpaying the state, and then the state, donated the money to the First Lady's Foundation, Hope Florida. Gary, if I'm not mistaken, when they started to dig into this $10 million donation that Centenine made to Hope Florida in September 2024, it seemed that the foundation is supposed to do what? To help people in Florida. Like, tell us why this foundation exists, and then tell us why this money didn't go for its purpose, and then tell us where the money actually went. Because I think it's relevant, folks.
Yeah, the ascribed mission of the Hope Foundation is to get people off of government entitlements in regards to healthcare, to get them away from Medicare and Medicaid, and get them into private organizations that help them, kind of like the 1-800-BIBLE, whatever it is, that the faith-based insurance and things of that sort. And instead, it was sent to those two organizations that, again, took that money and put it towards Ron DeSantis's anti-Amendment 3 campaign for this last election. So
let me pause you there. So the First Lady of Florida runs this foundation.
Yeah.
It's supposed to help get people off of welfare, to stop using Medicaid and government and our tax dollars to support their healthcare costs. And they got a big donation from a Medicaid vendor. And instead of using that money to get people off of Medicaid and get them healthcare in the private sector, her foundation donated the money to make sure that legal weed didn't pass in Florida.
That is correct. Yes.
What a fucking shit show. Carlos, what are your thoughts on this absolute fuckery of corruption in Florida?
I mean, I'm not surprised, to be honest with you. It's all been very corrupt, and I mean, it's just all hypocrisy too. Like, it's just like, don't these guys want people off of welfare? Isn't that like a big part of that? Why, you know? And you just spoke about that story about how there was a Republican organization that figured out that Republicans actually want legal weed. Like, and you asked if you were looking for a demographic that was looking to make cannabis illegal or keep cannabis illegal. And quite honestly, it's not Republican people, it's Republican politicians who want some sort of incentive to keep weed illegal or keep it where it is, because I mean, I just see this time and time and again where Ron DeSantis just sabotages us, and those Ron DeSantis Republicans just sabotage us.
Well, you know, ironically, his wife, he's propping her up to be the next governor of Florida.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, like, shit. If you wanted credentials to stand on your own, this is not it.
Exactly right.
This is going to be a shit show of a Republican primary. You got Congressman Byron Donalds from South Florida, who's going to run for governor on the Republican ticket. And then you got First Lady Casey DeSantis who's going to run, and then you see all this being funny with the money situation from the DeSantises. I mean, I have no trust in the governor. I mean, I've never trusted Ron DeSantis based on the fact that it's like, wow, okay, so you're pro weed, then you're anti weed, and then you're pro weed again, and then you're anti hemp, but then you're pro hemp if they give you money. And then you're anti-weed again because you didn't get enough money. I mean, for crying out loud, I mean, pick a struggle, pick a side.
Well, also there was a fact that there was pressure on DeSantis because he's not supposed to use taxpayer funds to put towards anti-amendment initiatives, supposedly. That's why they actually, Carlos Guillermo Smith actually put out a bill this year, which never got to committee, that was basically meant to say that governors cannot use taxpayer funds to fund anti-amendment campaigns. But this was his way around that. And he figured he could launder it this way. He just didn't realize that there are people who are actually watching.
Yeah, I mean, tax documents are what they are. Paperwork is what it is. Obviously, it's tax season. Everything's coming to light. So here we are. You know, it also strikes me, though, is that we're seeing some bills floating around in the state of Florida right now. They're going through various committees. Senate bill, was it 432 in Florida?
The hemp bill.
Yeah, the hemp bill essentially is going to make it to where if you want to sell hemp infused drinks, you got to have a liquor license. Also, it's going to definitely crack down on a lot of businesses. Carlos, how do you feel about this shit show? Because it's going to impact your revenue stream more than anybody.
Part of it is, the liquor license thing. Okay, it's bullshit. It's bullshit for sure. But that is a very small part, or will become a very small part given everything else. Because I mean, the milligram dosage that they're trying to put for the 5 grams per dose and 50 milligrams per package.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's going to make people not want a lot of my hemp drinks already.
Yeah, but now the House bill, that you should know, lowers that to 2 milligrams.
Mm.
Okay. All right. So that's fucked up. See how that goes. But also what's fucked up is, I'm on a fucking walking district. Like this is, one of my main forms of marketing is the fact that I have hemp on my window.
Yeah, they're gonna make you take that down, right? The bill says you can't market your hemp.
Well, what's happening? It's okay. So the Wilton Simpson administration, when they were given the law to not allow hemp be sold to children, right? They overstepped so far, right? There was a point where, I discussed this on another show where me and Vinny went up to Tallahassee, and with a number of different hemp activists, Vinny from Cushy Pies, a number of different hemp activists, we had to literally tell them, you can't, they were trying to enforce that by not allowing turmeric in products, not allowing carrot juice in products. They were banning the color pink. They were banning the color blue. There's pink is too close to a color that's attractive to children, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna make it so that you can't have that, right? Look at these fucking windows, right? What if somebody sees the big green cross in the back of my shop, or somebody sees the cases with hemp from my window, right? I have to go ahead and assume as a business owner that they're just not going to allow me to have these windows open. That they're just going to make me black out these entire windows. Nobody's really going to know what's inside. Right. And so I have to assume the worst. So, you give Wilton Simpson something like that, you assume it's going to be as far as possible. Right. Then all these taxes in the bill that Gary just suggested, not only are you going to reduce the milligrams so high that you're not even going to want it, you're going to raise the price.
Yep.
So what's going to happen? I mean, are people going to go out and get medical cards and start going to the cannabis industry, the corporate cannabis industry here? I mean, you know what? Possibly. All right.
Well, the representative who wrote the House bill, I think her name is Schwartzman. She made a very telling statement to the press. And she basically said, if you need to get 16 milligrams or more of THC into your body, maybe you should get a medical card and buy it from the MMTCs.
Well, that
I think is the actual goal of the entire hemp bill is to take that entire market and divert it back to the MMTCs. And it makes you wonder who's the person who slid that envelope of cash to the representatives and those people who wrote those bills to make this bill happen, because they weren't thinking about it on their own.
Here's the thing, though, Gary, and why I don't think our legislators and honestly law enforcement don't mind these bills so much is because people aren't going to go to the fucking MMTCs to buy this shit. They're going to go to the fucking drug dealers, the legacy market people. So there's more people to arrest.
Yeah. Well, I also want to point out this hemp bill, the Senate Bill 438, lists that hemp products cannot contain any quantity of synthetic derived cannabinoids or delta 8 THC, delta 10 THC, hex HHC, tetrahydrocannabinol acetate, tetrahydrocannabinol floral, or tetrahydrocannabivarin.
THCV. Yeah,
THCV, which is interesting because THCV helps you with appetite suppressant, right? Or is that the one that helps you get the munchies?
It occurs naturally.
THCV actually suppresses your munchies.
Suppresses. So that's great with weight loss.
So you can get stoned and not get the munchies.
Yeah. And then it says a THC infused beverage, which means a soft drink, soda, juice, tea, or other beverages intended to ingest, can't have more than 5 milligrams in a can or bottle. And then, obviously, they want you to have a liquor license to sell it. It definitely was a complete shit show. And then we saw it pass the Senate, and shout out to Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith, who changed his vote on the bill to a no, because we reached out to him. We're like, yo, this is not. There's no world where people are going to accept this as something that should move forward. I mean, clearly the folks are out of touch. They're overreaching, and they're going to affect small business owners across the state with this. That they're essentially trying to move the THC beverage market to Total Wine and Spirits and ABC Liquor, and they're trying to push the hemp customers to go to the multi-state operating MMTCs in Florida.
And guess who just put a hemp drink in ABC Liquor and Total Wine Liquor?
Curaleaf, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Actually, Curaleaf is opening up their own chain of hemp stores.
Oh, wow.
Put the drink into Total Wine.
Fucking Truly. There we go again.
Wow. Total Wine and Hemp.
Total Wine and Hemp. You know, ironically, Total Wine and Spirits is owned by a former Maryland congressman up here, and he actually ran for the U.S. Senate seat, but he lost in the primary to the current sitting U.S. Senator from Maryland, Angela Alsobrooks. David Trone was his name. So it's ironic to see that, you know. And I remember when we were looking at, you know, our union talking and looking at endorsing him and whatnot, because he went to bat for our union on some other things. One of the other unions was like, well, our people work at his store and we got beef with him because, you know, shout out to UFCW, who not only work in those stores, but also who work in the cannabis industry too. But, you know, I say all this to say this isn't new. And what's happening in Florida is happening elsewhere. This week in Montana, House and Senate lawmakers have sent bills to the governor's desk mandating new restrictions on edibles. House Bill 636 out of the state of Montana stipulates that a single serving of edibles may not exceed 5 milligrams of THC when their current law has it at 10 milligrams. And then Senate Bill 508 coming out of Montana imposes new criminal penalties for any motorist under the age of 21 who has any detectable amount of THC in their system, regardless if they're high or not, are gonna be arrested and hit with criminal charges. And the law already prohibits anyone from operating a motor vehicle with more than 5 nanograms in their blood, which is, you know, hardly nothing. So I mean, here we are. You know, you could not have smoked weed for over a week and you could still end up testing positive in the state of Montana and hit with a DUI charge. I mean, this is like Carlos, you hit it earlier. The law enforcement agencies are so terrified that they're going to lose their budgets, that they're not going to be able to waste our tax dollars anymore arresting cannabis consumers, that they're looking for ways to influence the law and overreach on public safety. And we're back to a police state. It's like you said earlier, and you talked about, Joe, for every 3 steps we make forward, we take 2 steps back as a country.
Yeah, well, I think we got a lot of things we have to fix. I think one of the things that we currently have disappearing due process. And if you think it'll just stop at immigration, you're wrong, because once you start out by getting exemptions from due process, you'll go on to other things as potential trafficking when you're actually just carrying hemp kind of thing in your truck. That might just get you sent to El Salvador before you even have a chance to talk to a judge to say, Judge, it was hemp. You know, that kind of situation.
I saw something on the internet the other day. I mean, if you know, take what you find on the internet as a grain of salt, but you know, it was Pam Bondi saying, you know, it was a Fox News headline: if you say fuck Trump, we're sending you to El Salvador. Which it may have been a meme, may have been a joke, but it's not a far stretch. You know, they've even said that members of the military, even if they're off duty, if you post something on your social media that's critical of any elected official, you will be prosecuted under UCMJ. I mean, so there is no dissent. They don't want any dissent in the military. They have fired the head JAG of the Air Force, the head JAG officer of the Army, the head JAG of the Navy. They want yes men in this administration, you know. And I don't want to be political, but there is nothing more political than the fact that people go to jail for smoking weed in this country. And I mean, it's a shit show.
And one other thing I don't want to bring up that's come up into the state of Florida is that buried inside of the urban and rural business bill, which is just basically an update bill for that department, is a statement which basically takes away the diversion plans at MMTCs. We put it into law originally, saying every MMTC has to have a diversity plan to make certain they have people of diverse origin in there. They've already cut out people of minority folks from being able to get into the business, but they're making certain so that nobody even can contract it by taking the word minority out of those statements and just putting in urban and rural businesses, making it no longer a diversity plan because they don't want diversity. And
Well,
yet that's something we put into law originally.
let's be clear about what folks can do right now. Okay. Carlos just dropped the link. You might see it in the feed. You can go to normal.org/act. That's the action center for NORML. And if you go and click on the state of Florida, there are currently 11 bills circulating between the House and the Senate. Many of them that we filed as Suncoast NORML that Gary and myself have co-written. Gary's done a fantastic job of putting together an amazing bill package that folks can support. Everything from tourist reciprocity to parental rights to employment protections. And so click on Florida, click on the little section where it says email your legislator and send to just quick, basically 11, 12 clicks. And you can get a letter off to Governor DeSantis, to your state senator, to your state rep, and let them know how you feel about these. Now, there is some hope in that House Bill 555 is moving forward. And that bill, the one thing that it does do in its current form is it's going to allow veterans in the state of Florida to get access and not have to pay the $75 card fee that the state levies against every other patient when they're trying to essentially, get access to a medical cannabis dispensary. So, originally there was home grow involved. There were some other things in the bill. Right now it's been chopped up and amended in committee to where it's just essentially a veterans medical access bill. And you know what? If that's the best we're going to get this session, that small step is cool for me. But I know right now that there are still bills out there that have been filed that have not gotten hearings. We're wrapping up into the final weeks of session here. They're going to get into budget talk soon, and things are going to move really fast in regards to cannabis, and we're not going to see much else moving. And I think that's the sad part, is that we have such great opportunities and such great legislation, and they just didn't give them committee hearings. The only thing they want to move forward with is public relations softballs, where you can take a picture with the vets, as a legislator saying you did something, and not deal with issues of people still getting fired from their jobs, not deal with issues of people having their patient status used against them in a custody hearing or being investigated by CPS for being essentially a medical patient. I mean, we have a fucked up system, and we're still going to keep fighting. We're still going to keep doing everything. And, this 420 is one of those times where, we're getting to that part of the day where it's like, fuck, all of this. We're giving you all this news. We're throwing all this at you. But you know what you can do right now? You can click those action alerts. You become a member of Suncoast NORML here locally. If you live in an area where there isn't a NORML chapter, if you're listening to this in a prohibition state, go to normal.org and click on how to find a chapter, how to start a chapter. It literally takes 4 or 5 friends to get together, become national NORML members, and then write up some bylaws and do some incorporation paperwork. But yes, we have been doing this for over a decade. Carlos, myself, Gary, shout out to the other members of our board, Tiffany, Sue, Carla, and thank y'all for continuing this mission. It's important. It is something that matters to each of us in our lives, whether it's because we've been personally affected or we've had to watch family members suffer who have been affected by cannabis prohibition. And it's something that we're still going to continue to fight for until the war is won, until the mission is accomplished. And it's something that I in good conscience can't walk away from, no matter how mad I get at folks who are in this space, who we're supposed to be working all together. And it drives me nuts that at times it seems that we're at cross purposes, whether that is folks that are in the hemp industry that are supporting this, whether it's folks in the cannabis activism space who, want to have more credit or have more of a light to shine. In the grand scheme of things, when the bills are signed, when the laws are changed, and when people are no longer arrested, I won't give a shit who takes credit for what. I will give a shit the fact that you can walk down the street, smoke a blunt, and not go to jail. And that's really the end game of it all. And that small business owners can make their money off of it. The people who currently are in jail for trying to pay their bills by selling weed are no longer in jail. And that we have this opportunity to change the system, to free people, to not have their records saddled. To that end, we have Cannabis Unity Week coming up in Washington, D.C. And there are some great events going on. Carlos, if you want to flash across the screen, I think it's important for folks to know we have the National Cannabis Festival Policy Conference on April 28th coming up. The other graphic, that one. This at the MLK Junior Memorial Library. It's free. Go online. You can go to nationalcannabisfestival.com. Get your free tickets if you want to attend. This is an all-day event featuring major speakers. People have actually been on this show, like Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton of D.C. or NORML's political director Morgan Fox. Folks that we've from the Last Prisoner Project and Drug Policy Alliance. So it's going to be a great action-packed day, an opportunity to meet with folks and really talk about it. And then go back to the schedules for the rest of the week. Last Prisoner Project is putting together a great training and welcome ceremony for folks who have never lobbied members of Congress on Tuesday the 29th. On Wednesday the 30th is going to be a lobby day on Capitol Hill, engaging our members of Congress and telling them to legalize it, to adopt these things like the States Act, to make sure that cannabis prisoners are being freed, that the pardons that were issued out by the Biden administration also get followed up with legislation from Congress to expunge records. And then, of course, we're going to have the Great American Cannabis Freedom Rally on Thursday, May 1st, in front of the White House as the sun's going down. It's going to be an opportunity for folks to really come together and close out the week with a bang. So visit the Last Prisoner Project's website, find the details, register for Cannabis Unity Week, and turn out, get yourself to DC next week and be a part of history. So, and that's pretty much all I got to say with the normal news. So I'll pass it to y'all to give any final thoughts.
Yeah,
well,
I got something I want to mention real quick before we turn it over to Gary. Just want to say real quick, I'm really proud of she's listening right now, but I'm really proud of our manager here at Ebor, who we spoke about this at prior shows where the DEA itself is actually leading like a social media anti-cannabis campaign, where they're getting a bunch of people to post onto social media bullshit about cannabis. And we on our Chillum Ebor Instagram, let me show you guys. We are fighting back and posting like positive things towards cannabis. And you guys probably remember this Weed with Roots in Hell. We're doing things like Weed with Roots in Health and things like that. And we're trying to flood Instagram with positive messages. So anybody that's listening, go and share and go to @Chillum and support Olivia, our manager here, for all the great things she's trying to do.
I did see that one where it says THC is bad for kids and adults who don't like it.
Yeah.
Like, hey, that was awesome.
Like, all right. Hey,
Gary, what are your final thoughts on this 420?
Well, first off, fuck my internet provider, who did such a wonderful job as far as screwing up my entire chance to talk with Joe Bondi and Steve. So I'm gonna have to do them on the DM because I had so many questions I wanted to ask. But I wanted to make a quick point out, and that is, as far as 555 is concerned, I am thrilled to death that all the things they shaved out, and they shaved out everything except for one thing. It was the cards for vets. It's something that we have been supporting for many years. In fact, we were one of the first ones to write a bill to allow a free cards for vets. And it got far, but it also got poison pilled along the way. And we had another one, which also, it was a copy of that one, which also went to the floor and got poison pilled on a floor amendment. So
Yeah,
let's not be unaware of what they might just do, because they might just make it so that, yeah, you'll get your cards, but
yeah, that was the 2018 that we had the free cards for vet bill, and then they put the THC caps on that bill, and it's like,
exactly
damn,
right.
We got to kill a good bill, so then that way people don't have THC caps. That was a shit show.
But that's where their modus operandi, and we're keeping an eye on it for you, but we need you to keep an eye on it as well. And if you see something, tell us something.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're a small business owner who's affected by these hemp bills, if you're a patient that's affected by the current system and what they're doing, by these limitations on your medicine, please reach out to us. Send us a message on Suncoast NORML. And as always, we are only as strong as our membership. So become a member today. Sign up on suncoastnormal.org. And if you're watching this on YouTube, click that like button, hit subscribe. We need more members on the channel because we want to make sure that we can continue to bring you the best and latest in cannabis news and amazing celebrities in this space each and every week. And with that, we'll catch y'all in the rotation next week.
Bye, everybody.